Are you a good witch or a bad witch? Popular. I'll help you be popular. There are bridges you cross you didn't know you crossed until you've crossed. Today we're talking about Glinda the Good. Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees. And do you know which witch is trending again? Glinda. That's right, with all of this wicked content breaking the Oz side of the internet and making waves in popular culture with its all-star cast, people are turning their attention back to everyone's favorite, air quote, good witch. And it got me to thinking, how did we get to this point where a 1-chapter cameo character from L. Frank Baum's original book suddenly becomes the poster child for the biggest movie of the year, nay, decade? To me, at least. And that's what we're discussing today. From novels to film to stage and back to film again, we are discussing the evolution of Glinda, the air quote, good. Now, it probably makes sense to start with L. Frank Baum's book, right? Maria von Trapp rules. Start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Wrong. The thing is, we can't really start with the novel without addressing the green elephant in the room. Like most things Oz-related, Glinda has been defined by the 1939 MGM film. Now, this was not the first time Glinda was portrayed on screen. That honor goes to Evelyn Judson in a lost silent film from 1908, and then Olive Cox in a not lost silent film from 1910. But Olive Cox's Glinda didn't do that much. She rose out of the ground, she turned Toto into a furry, and then she flew away. Sidebar. I cannot look at this Olive Cox footage without thinking of that commercial from the 90s with an off-brand Glinda falling because she used the wrong brand of fishing wire. And you notice who she's dressed as? Billie Burke. Proving once again that even though she wasn't the first, Billie Burke remains the most iconic Glinda. And again, that can kind of be said for the 1939 film overall when it comes to all things Oz. Now, it's a classic film. It's my favorite film of all time, but it is also such a drastic departure from the source material. And for better or worse, or good, for good, Glinda might actually be the character most affected by the changes made for the movie, specifically because of one line.
I'm Glinda, the Witch of the North.
The Witch of the North. The Witch of the North.
See, the movie made a choice that made sense for that movie, but inadvertently kind of messed with Oz canon for the rest of the 20th century and beyond, because the 1939 movie only acknowledges 3 witches of Oz: North, East, and West. But in the novel, there's 4. A good witch of the North, a wicked witch of the East, a good witch of the South, and of course, a wicked witch of the West. Basically, up and down is good witch, left to right is wicked witch. But also, once you get deeper into the book lore, you eventually learn that there is a Wicked Witch of the North and a Wicked Witch of the South, but that's another video for another day. Hashtag Mombi. We love her. The point is, the MGM film combined the North Witch and the South Witch to give us this pink diva. MGM's Glinda is an amalgamation of the unnamed Good Witch of the North and Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. Which was fine for that film, because obviously they were crafting a more focused narrative, and in the context of that movie, it totally makes sense to, have one witch that's good and one witch that's wicked, perfectly balanced as all things should be. But it also meant that casual Oz fans being introduced to the world through this film and this film alone really didn't get a sense of the true scope of the world of Oz. One of the coolest things from the book series that I think gets overlooked a lot is the geography of Oz, or the geography. So Oz is broken up into 4 different counties, plus the Emerald City, which kind of exists in the middle as its own thing. I feel like it's kind of like how Washington, D.C. apparently isn't a state. Anyway, that aside, you have Munchkin Land in the east, Gillikin Country in the north, Winky Country in the west, and Quadling Country in the south. Anyway, the MGM movie shows us Munchkin Land, Emerald City, and Winky Country, but it cuts almost a third of the original narrative. In the book, after the wizard goes off in his balloon, Dorothy and friends have to go on another adventure, this time to Quadling Country, where they eventually meet Glinda. Quadling Country is located in the southern quadrant of Oz, and their trademark color is red. In fact, there are actually fan theories that say the red brick road that we see in Munchkinland actually leads to Quadling Country because, obviously, red. And let the record show that things get wild in Quadling Country. The book makes a point of saying that the Quadlings are kind of isolated from the rest of Oz because they would need to bypass a lot of chaos in order to leave their land and see the rest of the country. Quadling Country is where you get talking trees, like in the MGM film, China Country, like in the Disney film, and the Hammerheads, who, thank Oz, have never been adapted into a live-action film, because those things would be my new sleep paralysis demon, even though they do kind of show up in Wicked the Musical on stage. Anyway, amid all of this havoc lives the most powerful witch of all the witches. The funny thing about Glinda in the book is that after the wizard leaves, Dorothy is basically given the same song and dance all over again. She's told that there is a magical person on the other side of Oz who is all-powerful, who is wise, who is possibly an immortal, who could hold the answer to getting her home. Only this time, all of that's true. Once Dorothy finally reaches Glinda's palace, she is met with a woman described as being both beautiful and young, with rich red hair and a white dress, because white is the color of the good witches of Oz. So with that in mind, it is actually perfectly fitting that Glinda's trademark color has become pink. This gorgeous blend of red, the Quadling signature color, and white, the color of the Good Witches of Oz. And during this meeting, Glinda goes through the motions we're all familiar with. She tells Dorothy that the silver slippers, yeah, in the book they're silver, you should know that by now. She tells Dorothy that the silver slippers have the power to take her home, and then Dorothy goes home. And this has to be the most consistent story beat in all Oz adaptations. No matter what changes are made to the story, it will always end with Glinda telling Dorothy how to get home. But it's worth noting that in the book, that's the only purpose Glinda serves. She is basically a Deus Ex Machina, and I say that in the best way possible. Glinda is the ultimate Deus Ex Machina, in more ways than one, you know? She is literally the magical creature who floats down from the sky in some kind of theatrical machinery to save the day. Allow me to explain. Deus Ex Machina is a term that dates back to Greek theater and translates into God from the machine. Basically, it's a plot device that kind of forces a happy ending. So when a story hits a point of hopelessness, that is when a god comes down from the sky to solve everything with their god magic. The reason it's called God from the Machine is because traditionally there would be some kind of special effect to allow this god character to have a grand entrance before they fixed everything with their god magic. So, you know, they could be raised through a trap door, they could be wheeled on stage in a grand chariot, or lowered onto the stage via wires, or perhaps large mechanical bubble. The term does come with a little bit of scrutiny today because modern audiences, including myself, we want endings that are earned, and a Deus Ex Machina can kind of feel like lazy writing, but for the ancient Greek audiences, a Deus Ex Machina closed out their evening at the amphitheater with this level of spectacle that sparked wonder and awe and just this like guttural emotional reaction. And I think L. Frank Baum's Glinda is a perfect example of a Deus Ex Machina serving that purpose in a modern context, because her arrival in the story sparks wonder and awe while at the same time feeling earned. Because, you know, again, in the context of the book, we know that Oz has 4 lands. We know that each land has and or had a witch. And until the wizard leaves, we've met 3 out of those 4 witches. And then in this moment of helplessness, Glinda emerges as a glimmer of hope, and the first person to actually yield magic and wisdom that can help Dorothy. And for my money, there is no better adaptation of this than in the musical The Wiz. There are a lot of great things about The Wiz, but one of them is that it is the most faithful mainstream adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. The Wiz, that is an adaptation that understands the power of Glinda as a Deus Ex Machina. Well, most versions, anyway. Not only does Glinda arrive at the 11th hour on the scene to save the day, she does it while singing one of the most emotionally packed songs in the show. She has so little stage time, but it is a starring role. It is a role that won a Tony Award for Dee Dee Bridgewater in the original Broadway cast. Also, if you want to hear a really great interview with Dee Dee Bridgewater, go over, listen to Down the Yellow Brick Pod. Actually, listen to all their episodes. They're amazing. But they have an episode where they interview Dee Dee Bridgewater. it's astounding. Anyway, what was I saying? For the film adaptation of The Wiz, they had Hollywood legend Lena Horne show up to bring the house down in that 11th hour, surrounded by floating star babies. In The Wiz Live, she was played by Uzo Abdullah, who was just coming off of a huge success with Orange is the New Black, and she had like the most literal Deus Ex Machina entrance. She came in from the sky, sparkling gold. It ate. And in the most current Broadway revival, Glinda was played by Canadian icon Deborah Cox, with one infamous difference. That revival of The Wiz did not save Glinda for the end. In perhaps another example of the MGM film overpowering the source material, the most recent revival of The Wiz was rewritten, and it had Glinda arriving in Munchkinland to send Dorothy off to the Emerald City. Now, full disclosure, I did not get a chance to see this most recent revival, so I can't say really if the change worked or not. I mean, I couldn't even tell you why that decision was made, but I have my theories. I feel like the decision was twofold. At least twofold. I think one of the folds was that they had Deborah Cox in the show. She was the biggest name that the production had to draw in audience members. Because let's face it, the average New York tourist isn't going to see The Wiz because they're diehard Oz fans. They're seeing it because it's based on a familiar property and it features a familiar face. And who am I to complain that the audience has got double the Deborah Cox? But also, I think this is another example of the MGM film having a more prominent impact on pop culture than the novel. That average New York tourist going to see The Wiz will expect Glinda to show up in Munchkinland like they've seen in the MGM film, and not just at the end, as in the book. So with that said, those of you who only know the MGM film might be asking, if Glinda doesn't show up until the end of the book, who sends Dorothy to the Emerald City? Easy. The Good Witch of the North. Because remember, they are two different characters, the Good Witch of the North and Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, and each one has a crucial and unique purpose. Now, there aren't a ton of examples of actors who have actually played the Good Witch of the North. The most famous would actually probably be Miss Piggy. She played all four witches in objectively the worst Muppet movie of all time. Now, there is a fan theory running around the internet saying that Madame Morrible from Wicked could be the Witch of the North, in which case Michelle Yeoh would be the most famous actress to ever play the Good Witch of the North. But I don't know, she's not good, and I guess I only kind of like that theory because then at least it restores that four-witch balance. But truly, the best and most book-accurate interpretation of the Witch of the North is once again in The Wiz. Now, in the film, she goes by Miss One, and in the musical, her name is Ada Pearl. It's kind of inconsistent, but you know what? That tracks, because even in L. Frank Baum's book universe, the Good Witch of the North went by a few different names. So, the character's official name is Locusta. Locusta? Locusta. That's the only name that was given to the character by L. Frank Baum himself. Even though it wasn't actually in any of his books, it was in one of his stage plays. Her other name is Tatipoo, which is technically book canon, but written by another author, not L. Frank Baum. But it is much more fun to say. I'd like to believe her name is Locusta Tatipoo. Unlike Glinda, the gorgeous and ageless immortal, the Good Witch of the North is basically like a sweet little old grandma type. She's described as this little old woman with white hair wearing a white pointy witch's hat, roughly the same height as the Munchkins. And you know what? Compared to the MGM film, Dorothy's arrival in Munchkinland in the book is pretty anticlimactic. She's only greeted by 3 Munchkins and 1 witch, and none of them do a complicated song and dance number. But the Witch of the North does all the same familiar story beats in that scene. She welcomes Dorothy to Oz. She tells Dorothy the Wicked Witch of the East is dead. She balances her hat on her nose, and then it turns into a magical chalkboard that says to send Dorothy to the Emerald City. Okay, Billie Burke didn't do that last part. She didn't balance anything on her nose, but she still told Dorothy to go to the Emerald City. Billie Burke's Glinda just knew, hey, Dorothy, go to the Emerald City. That Glinda came up with the idea on her own. Kinda sus, but we'll get there. And this is a small but critical detail, because the biggest difference between the Witch of the North and Glinda is that the Witch of the North is not that powerful. The North Witch even tells Dorothy that she would have liberated the Munchkins herself from the Wicked Witch of the East, but the Wicked Witch of the East overpowered her. But Tatipoo does seem to have one useful power, which is a protection spell. Before sending Dorothy off on her journey to the Emerald City, she gives her a kiss on the forehead and tells her no one will dare injure a person who has been kissed by the Witch of the North. We don't really get more details on why that's the case, but we do know it's true because we see it at play. When the winged monkeys and even the Wicked Witch of the West come into contact with Dorothy, they can't harm her because of that kiss. And we might not get this plot point explicitly in the MGM film, but you will notice a callback to it when Billie Burke Glinda kisses Judy on the forehead before she screws off in her bubble and leaves Dorothy to her own defenses until she can come back at the end of the film to save the day. And see, on that note, having Glinda as Dorothy's first point of contact in Oz totally recontextualizes the narrative. Because in the book, the Witch of the North comes off as being earnest and sincere. She is upfront with Dorothy. She shows all of her cards. And even though she isn't that powerful, she still helps Dorothy as much as she can. But when you put Glinda into that scene, it's the opposite. Glinda is Oz's most powerful witch. She is withholding information from Dorothy, and she is not helping as much as she can. She is helping as much as she is willing to.
You've always had the power to go back to Kansas. Excuse me?
Why didn't you tell her before?
Because she wouldn't have believed me. Are you out of your mind?
And that gives us almost an entirely different story. A story that has actually given rise to a popular fan theory that Glinda is the true villain of the MGM film. I mean, considering that she's the grand marshal of this parade that's celebrating the very recent death of a woman, like granted an evil woman, but still, like, do you parade in the streets? Questionable. She also only steps in to help Dorothy once with the poppies and then allows Dorothy to risk her life multiple times. There is absolutely an argument to be made that Glinda is using Dorothy as a scapegoat to eliminate all the other powerful sources in Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, the fake wizard, thus leaving Glinda in control without having to get her hands dirty or risk her reputation as Glinda the air quote good. And admittedly, there is something a lot of fun in that interpretation of the film. And I actually think you can watch the movie with those eyes, and it is in part supported by Billie Burke's performance. And you know what? I think it's time. Let's take a moment to discuss the woman behind the most iconic Glinda, Billie Burke. Billie Burke was born August 7th, 1844, into a show business family. Her father was a clown with the Barnum and Bailey Circus. We love clowns. Billie began her career as a child actress. She dabbled in vaudeville and then started performing on Broadway in the early 1900s before going Hollywood and appearing in silent films. And let's make one thing clear. The fans loved Billie. Let's take a moment to appreciate how far ahead of her time Billie Burke was. She was an influencer before that was even a thing. I mean, yes, she was admired for her skills as an actress. Reportedly, Billie was the highest paid actress in Hollywood at one time, but she was also married to the Ziegfeld Follies guy, so she was just popular by merit of her public image, a public image she cultivated that leaned very much into a lavish and enviable lifestyle. And she was able to capitalize on that image, both in terms of her acting career, as well as solidifying herself as a trendsetter. There was a Billie Burke dress that became all the rage. She endorsed this thing called vanishing cream. Where'd it go? I don't know. Blame Billie Burke. And there was also Billie Burke chocolates. That's my favorite thing. She just slapped her face onto a box of chocolates and made a ton of money off of it. So yeah, she was rocking the hashtag ad lifestyle long before all of us. Icon. And it is so fascinating to consider that Billie Burke was a performer who thrived in an ever-changing entertainment industry. And bear in mind that those changes in the entertainment industry were career killers in most cases. But Billie was somebody who was able to transition from vaudeville into Broadway. From Broadway into Hollywood. And then once she was in Hollywood, she made, like, the seemingly impossible transition from silent films into talkies. Now yeah, Billie came up in Hollywood in silent films. She rivaled other actresses like Mary Pickford. But when the talkies started to gain popularity, that only propelled Billie's career forward compared to the majority of silent film stars who had it end their careers because they were not performers who were accustomed to speaking. Now, of course, Billie had an advantage because she did have that theatrical background, but she also had something that you can't teach. She had this incredible, unique, beautifully musical speaking voice.
Do you know what's happened to me? I've had the most ghastly day anybody ever had.
Shut up! Shut up, I tell you. Let me think.
It was a voice that landed her a lot of character roles. There was a lot of comedy and a lot of elegance that was encapsulated in that voice. And that voice, paired with Billie's overall persona, those two things came together to create the character that we think of today when we think of Glinda. Because the thing with Glinda, and I say this with all respect for Billie Burke, MGM Glinda is kind of a space cadet. Now, and that's because this is a performer, a very talented performer, who carried herself on screen with the overly theatrical air that one would naturally have coming from a background where they trained in vaudeville, where they did Broadway, and they did silent films. You combine that acting style with her voice, and you get this otherworldly type of person who's very charismatic, but also sort of surface level and a little bit empty. That's my best Glinda impression. That's the best I got for you right now. The way Billie Burke plays Glinda, you really get the impression that she knows a lot more than she's letting on. Whereas the Wicked Witch of the West, she shows her hand freely, but Glinda keeps her cards close to her chest. And that, my friends, is how we ended up with Glinda as portrayed in the smash hit sensation, Wicked. In 1995, Gregory Maguire published Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, a reimagining of the world of Oz told as an origin story for Elphaba, the green girl who would become the Wicked Witch of the West. The book was a modest success, but it soon caught the attention of composer Stephen Schwartz, the man behind the hit Broadway musicals Pippin and Godspell. And after securing the rights to Wicked, he started work on adapting the material into a musical. The show started workshops in Los Angeles in 2000, and much like Gregory Maguire's novel, early workshops of Wicked the Musical were pretty well solely focused on Elphaba. Now, Glinda was still present, but she was very much a supporting character who only had one song.
Popular.
For that initial reading, Stephen Schwartz convinced Kristen Chenoweth to play Glinda. Now, Chenoweth had her hands full at the time because she was working on her sitcom. Apparently, she had a sitcom called Kristen, but it was an easy enough job to do simultaneously because all she had to do for the workshop was show up, sing Popular, and that was it.
Popular. Shut up, I tell you.
But once Chenoweth was attached, the rest was kind of history. The role became hers, and as the musical developed, her involvement in the creative process grew, and by extension, the role of Glinda also grew. Eventually, the Wicked writing team decided to focus the narrative on the friendship between Glinda and Elphaba, and with Kristen Chenoweth still attached to the project, she also began to shape how the character of Glinda was being reimagined. One of the most notable things Chenoweth brought to the table was this deeper exploration into some of the character choices that Billie Burke made when she originated, I guess, the role of Glinda. In one interview, Chenoweth said,
When I grew up watching the movie, I thought, even as a child, I thought, God, there's something wrong with that Glinda. It's just not real. And I didn't set out exactly to emulate her, but I did like the way she was sort of plastic. And what I wanted to do was, you were talking about the layers, I wanted to show really what's going on there.
Kristen Chenoweth was instrumental in fleshing out the role of Glinda. She helped develop the role into a character who begins as a spoiled, selfish, mean girl, unaware of her own privilege, who grows up and becomes the leader that Oz needs by merit of the things that she learns from Elphaba. And to that end, Kristen Chenoweth is the reason that Glinda opens the show singing in her legit soprano range for No One Mourns the Wicked. Allegedly, the original plan was for Glinda in No One Mourns the Wicked to be singing with like a low belt, like No One Mourns the Wicked. It would have sounded exactly like that coming out of Kristen Chenoweth's mouth. But no, seriously. Glinda was going to sing that with a lower belt type thing going on, and Stephen Schwartz was only planning to utilize Chenoweth's high notes, I think for comedic effect in Popular. But Kristen pushed to open the show with those higher notes, and not just to show off, which honestly is her God-given right, because we all want to hear Chenoweth hitting those high notes, but it was more of an extension of that mysterious quality, that mysterious Billie Burke quality that Chenoweth identified in 1939 Glinda. And now in Wicked, when Glinda sings in that high, legit soprano range, it's because that is when she is putting on her public figure persona. That's when she's going full of Vita. That bubbly, plastic, overtly positive personality that suggests she's hiding something. And that said, one of the reasons Glinda is such an incredible role in Wicked is because her singing evolves as the character evolves. Her singing changes as the character grows. She starts off the show, of course, singing in that higher, bubblier range, but then as she begins to mature and develops a conscience, her singing also transforms, and she starts to take on a lower, fuller, more resonant quality. Like what we hear when she sings Thank Goodness, or the low note in the I'm Not That Girl reprise. You know, I'm not that girl. Ba, 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 ba. And of course, that final harmony in For Good, that beautiful harmony where Glinda takes the low note and Elphaba takes the high note, signifying that just as Elphaba has taught things to Glinda, Glinda has taught things to Elphaba. And through the combination of Kristen's input plus Winnie Holtzman's book and Stephen Schwartz's score, Glinda evolved into this beautifully complex, multi-layered character whose arc is mirrored through how she uses her singing voice. Now listen, I think both Elphaba and Glinda are great roles, but I am currently in my era where I feel like Glinda is the more complicated and far more interesting role between the two of them. And to really truly pull off playing Glinda, you need a performer who is not only an incredible actor, but who can also meet the vocal demands of singing legit soprano while also dabbling in a pop sound, plus a little bit of belting. This role demands a ton of vocal versatility. And that's why my pick for Glinda in the movie was Ashley Park. I feel like Ashley Park can do anything. Ashley Park would have been so flippin' good. She would have been perfection. But as we all know, the role was won fair and square by Ariana Grande. And I'll admit, I was a little on the fence about this casting announcement when it was first made. However, I have been changed for now. I have actually loved everything I've seen of her in the trailers and in the clips they've released so far. Whether or not she'll be able to pull off the role from an acting stance is still to be seen, but I am cautiously optimistic. But what really excites me about her casting is that she is undoubtedly, she is, without a doubt, a skilled and versatile enough singer to meet the vocal demands of Glinda. So if nothing else, we know it's going to sound beautiful. And I don't doubt she's going to nail the comedy. And I feel like between her natural instincts, alongside working with Cynthia Erivo and Jon M Chu, she will hopefully be able to tap into those darker and more tragic sides of Glinda. Because that side of Glinda is what makes Wicked so compelling. Wicked is this exploration of the idea that wicked people have a capacity for good, and good people have the capacity for wickedness. You know, the show takes on a whole new meaning when you imagine that the title Wicked could actually be describing Glinda, or just as much Glinda as Elphaba. And you know, this is a bold claim, but I truly feel like Wicked it's kind of done the impossible by setting a new prototype for how people think of Glinda. That's something that hasn't been done since 1939, since Billie Burke. But in the end, Wicked's Glinda was still built on the foundation that Billie built. So no matter how this character continues to grow and evolve, I think the evolution of Glinda is still always going to come back around to the legend, the queen herself, Billie Burke. You know, I think it's impossible to do a portrayal of Glinda without having her in the back of your mind, either as a performance to pay homage to or to completely avoid. But that role is always going to be Billie's. And who knows, maybe 100 years from now, just as much that role will be Ariana Grande's. But only time will tell. And with that, friends, this concludes yet another episode of Teacup 4-1. Now let me know in the comment section down below, what is your favorite portrayal of Glinda, the Good Witch? Of the North? Of the South? Maybe both. Who knows? And if you want to be the first to know when I release more videos talking about Oz, witches, both wicked and good, as well as Disney, Funko Pop, sometimes Shakespeare, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And if you haven't subscribed already, it is so easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Tea Cup for 1. Go watch my video on the Wicked Witch of the East.